Welcome to today's Explainer. Okay, so we're going to dive straight into the deep, dark, honestly pretty eerie shadows of Detroit's history. We're talking about a place where an incredibly ominous, terrifying folklore legend has literally haunted the minds of residents for well over 3 centuries. Seriously, we are looking at a mythological entity that is so heavily steeped in misfortune and sheer dread that just whispering its name is said to invite absolute calamity. This right here is the anatomy of an omen. We are going to meticulously dissect the legend of the Nain Rouge. We'll be peeling back all these wild layers of history, sociology, and, pure bone-chilling terror to understand exactly how a 300-year-old monster still holds a massive, modern American metropolis in its grip today.
So, picture this. Imagine you're walking alone at night along the cold, misty banks of the Detroit River. The fog is rolling in thick, and suddenly you encounter this absolutely bone-chilling creature. Historic texts describe it as this dwarfish humanoid, very red in the face, with a bright, glistening eye that emits a cold, bewildering gleam. It has a grinning mouth displaying sharp, pointed, rotten teeth, and there's matted fur covering its small, shambling body. And, just to make the whole thing even more nightmare-inducing, it is said to caw like a crow. No thank you, right? This terrifying sight has struck deep, visceral fear into the hearts of Detroiters since the very inception of the city.
Now you really have to ask yourself, what if a city's absolute darkest, most devastating days were actually physically foretold by a single, terrifying monster? We are going to hunt down the origins of this Nain Rouge, which, by the way, translates from French as the Red Dwarf. Because this creature, it isn't just a spooky campfire story you tell to scare kids. Its horrifying appearances are inextricably linked to Detroit's most tragic and bloody moments. It's essentially regarded as the ultimate harbinger of doom. It's a malevolent force that literally dances in the wake of destruction. History tells us that when the Nain Rouge appears, utter disaster is never ever far behind. This timeline of bloodshed perfectly maps out the sheer scale of the terror. It's honestly mind-blowing. Think back to 1763, right before the Battle of Bloody Run, where 58 British soldiers were slaughtered. Well, the Nain Rouge was reportedly seen dancing among the corpses on the riverbanks as the water literally turned red with blood. Then, before the Great Fire of 1805, a fire that burned down practically every single structure in the city, multiple sightings were reported. In 1812, it was seen leering and laughing through the thick fog at General William Hull upon the surrender of Detroit. And it doesn't stop in the past. Fast forward to the 20th century, 2 utility workers claimed to see the creature leaping around just before the devastating 1967 riots. In 1976, it was spotted shimmying up a utility pole right before a catastrophic ice storm left 400,000 people freezing without power. It's a persistent, undeniable shadow of doom.
Section 1, Cadillac and the Curse.
To truly dissect this legend and understand the anatomy of the omen, we have to go all the way back to 1701. According to the lore, right before the French explorer Antoine de la Motte Cadillac founded Detroit, a fortune teller warned him of a tiny red troublemaker. She told him explicitly, appease the Nain Rouge, beware of offending him. But Cadillac? Well, he was a pretty arrogant aristocrat. He wasn't going to listen. When he was strolling along the Detroit River and actually crossed paths with the red imp, he didn't appease it at all. He violently struck the creature with his cane, shouting at it to get out of his way. Big mistake. The demon apparently laughed this wicked, cackling laugh and cursed him right there on the spot. Cadillac's arrogant refusal to heed the psychic's warning triggered a supernatural curse that completely ruined his life. He was eventually charged with abuse of power, exiled to Louisiana, thrown into a French prison, and lost every penny of his fortune. The curse was cemented into history.
So you might be wondering, how do we actually know about these early encounters? Well, as academic reviews of the Virtual Museum of Canada show, these chilling oral traditions didn't just appear out of thin air. They were meticulously, carefully passed down through isolated Francophone communities along the Detroit River. For generations, these French settlers kept the terrifying stories of the Nain Rouge alive through whispered fireside warnings. They embedded the creature deep, deep into the cultural DNA of the region.
Section 2, Dissecting the Red Dwarf.
But let's take a step back. What exactly is the Nain Rouge? Like, where did this monster come from before Cadillac ever even set foot in Michigan? By really dissecting the myth, we find a fascinating and honestly slightly terrifying cultural blend. On one hand, you've got the French origins brought over by the early colonizers. These are tales of the Lutin, which is this malicious, intensely territorial Norman French hobgoblin, known for causing pure havoc. On the other hand, you have the immensely rich indigenous spirit legends from the Ojibwe and Potawatomi traditions. They spoke of an impish, stone god offspring, or a Manitou. The Nain Rouge is essentially the sinister merging of these two distinct cultural fears. It's an urbanized fairy, basically an old-world boogeyman adapted to a wild New World frontier.
Now, if we look at this from a scientific perspective, sociologists argue the creature is a classic act of anthropomorphism. And this is a really vital concept for our explainer today. Anthropomorphism is essentially a way of simplifying a terrifying, totally chaotic world by projecting our complex human anxieties and societal patterns onto a physical entity. Think about it. The early citizens of Detroit were facing uncontrollable, devastating fires, brutal wars, and crushing economic collapses. Psychologically speaking, it was so much easier to create a physical scapegoat, a demonic Red Dwarf, to blame for these terrifying, uncontrollable events, rather than just having to sit there and accept the random, senseless brutality of the universe.
This actually brings up a really crucial point, captured perfectly by Professor Kate Grandjean, a specialist in early American and Native American history. She notes that historically, the Nain Rouge has mostly been a menace to those in power. That's a huge twist, right? The dwarf isn't just some mindless monster terrorizing peasants. For centuries, it has actually acted as a supernatural punisher of the elite, striking down wealthy, arrogant figures like Cadillac and General Hall. So in a weird way, it functions as a strange supernatural defender for those who are constantly on the losing end of colonization and systemic power.
And through rigorous archival work, detailed in these museum reviews, we see exactly how the oral history of the Nain Rouge was finally cemented in writing. Because believe it or not, there are 0 written records of the Nain Rouge from the 1700s. None. It wasn't until a woman named Marie Caroline Watson Hamlin published her book Legends of Le Detroit in 1883 that the terrifying dwarf was formally introduced to the printed page. She was the one who meticulously documented the chilling, glowing eyes and the rotten teeth, permanently locking this oral phenomenon into the historical record, long after Cadillac's time.
Section 3. The Modern March. Okay, let's fast forward to the 21st century and look at something truly remarkable. How does a massive, modern, post-industrial city physically confront a 300-year-old ancient demon today? Well, the answer is La Marche du Nain Rouge. Revived in 2010, this is a massive, annual Mardi Gras-style festival held on the vernal equinox in Detroit's Cass Corridor, an area now known as Midtown. Thousands of Detroiters take to the streets with the express purpose of banishing the evil spirit. But here is the genuinely creepy part. All the revelers wear these incredibly elaborate masks and disguises. And why? Because they are literally terrified the Nain Rouge will recognize their faces and seek personal, vengeful curses against them throughout the coming year. So they hide. The whole parade ultimately culminates in this massive, fiery spectacle where they mockingly banish the demon and burn its effigy to the ground.
This whole modern festival really highlights something amazing. Folklore isn't just dusty history stored away in archives or forgotten books. Not at all. It is a highly active, breeding tradition that is kept alive by the community. The people of Detroit are actively participating in their own mythology. They're taking back power from the omen of doom that has supposedly plagued their streets for centuries.
Section 4. Urban Folklore and Gentrification. However, things are never that simple, right? This modern revival of a centuries-old monster hunt has actually sparked a deeply complex and highly controversial sociological debate. Serious academic journals like Geoforum have begun analyzing the Marché du Nain Rouge not just as a fun, quirky costume party, but through the rigorous lens of urban development and spatial politics. They are asking some really hard questions about what it actually means to symbolically banish something from a neighborhood that is undergoing massive, rapid demographic changes. The absolutely crucial point here is the stark divide in perspectives within the city. On one side, you have the parade supporters and the founders who view the march as a joyful, incredibly cathartic celebration of Detroit's resilience. To them, it's a vibrant chance to shake off the bitter winter, shake off the city's hard times, and just celebrate new beginnings together. But on the other side, academic critics and some longtime local residents argue it acts as a march of gentrification. They strongly suggest that the act of banishing a figure in a neighborhood that's being heavily targeted for high-end redevelopment kind of mimics a ceremony of property possession. They argue it echoes the uncomfortable patterns of settler colonialism from the past. Researchers actually point to historical precedents to frame this critique. They look at things like mid-century urban homesteading acts and older racial property laws. They suggest that in a rapidly, drastically redeveloping neighborhood like Midtown, this concept of banishing a dark entity carries some pretty uncomfortable undertones. The academic argument here is that this narrative of greening the urban frontier and chasing away the so-called bad elements can sometimes be used to subtly justify the displacement of marginalized, lower-income populations who have called these areas home for decades.
And this academic tension, it isn't just staying neatly tucked away in the journals. It literally spilled out into the streets. In 2014, critics organized an anti-funeral procession in the Cass Corridor at the exact same time as the parade. Their message to the revelers and the property developers was pointed and honestly, very powerful. They chanted things along the lines of, "Somebody's got to tell them that we are not ghosts, that we are in this city and we are alive." It was a direct, visceral protest against the parade's narrative, serving to remind absolutely everyone that longtime residents are not just negative baggage meant to be banished away.
So, as we look closely at this sociological debate, we realize we have two very distinct realities coexisting in the exact same physical space. On one hand, you have this organic, beloved, culturally vibrant urban festival that's genuinely trying to bring people together for a good time. On the other hand, you have a rigorous, heavily researched academic critique warning about the very real dangers of a post-industrial urban frontier mindset. We want to present both of these views completely impartially here because it just perfectly illustrates how powerful and how intensely layered a simple folklore story can become the moment it intersects with real-world urban dynamics.
Meanwhile, completely outside the intense academic debates and the street protests, the creature itself has quietly become a highly lucrative mascot. The Nain Rouge has been thoroughly, unapologetically commercialized. That terrifying grinning face now adorns local Detroit craft beers like the hugely popular Detroit Dwarf lager. There's even a hardcore 120-proof Absinthe du Nain Rouge you can buy. The demon has even starred in experimental art films like Eric Milliken's award-winning deepfake documentary. So yeah, the ancient harbinger of doom is now literally driving serious local economic activity.
When you put the commercialization and the protests side by side, it ultimately reveals the beautiful, messy, ongoing conversation of human cultures. What started over 300 years ago as a terrifying, blood-chilling French and Native American campfire story meant to warn people of the literal dark, a pure monster meant to invoke gut-wrenching fear, has completely evolved. It has become the ultimate multifaceted symbol of a massive city constantly wrestling with its deep past traumas, its very complicated present realities, and its unknown future identity.
Which brings us to our final, lingering thought for today. Is the Nain Rouge truly a demonic harbinger of destruction, summoned to drown the city in fire and ice? Is it a supernatural protector of the marginalized, meant to punish the arrogant elite? Or is it simply a mirror, perfectly, flawlessly reflecting the deep-seated anxieties of a constantly changing city? As you look at the shifting, complex landscape of Detroit today, you really have to ask yourself a terrifying question. When the glowing red eyes of the Nain Rouge inevitably pierce through the fog once again, whose doom is he actually predicting? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep your eyes open in the dark and keep learning.